The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Assalamu alaikum. That means peace be unto you. I'm Sister Charlene Muhammad. Welcome to Liberated Sisters. Today is a full justice report. Where do we go from here? The Final Call newspaper looks at the questions that remain in the fight for justice for George Floyd and Black America. We have charges of police rioting in the streets. Protesters, advocates say brutal cops are still killing and abusing people. That's going to lead out the show. After that, we will bring you the Liberated Sisters COVID report. This is a series of information and update by Ethnic Media Services, our partner. Myself and Angela Birdsong will give you highlights from, again, the Liberated Sisters COVID report, what's happening with the global pandemic and how that impacts you. After that, we bring you the Farrakhan factor. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's highly anticipated address to the world takes place on July 4th. God willing, we will bring right after that an excerpt of Farrakhan predicted the unraveling of a great nation. This address was delivered on June 8th via webcast by his national assistant, student minister Ismail Muhammad. But first, a word on why and when Farrakhan speaks, the world should listen.
Greetings, dear listeners. We have been blessed by Almighty God Allah over the 90 years of our work in the Nation of Islam and lifting our people up from the miserable condition in which we find ourselves. We ask your support of our effort, and we hope that you will be generous and make a contribution to the work of the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan by clicking the button below or go to noi.org/donate. We thank you in advance for your support. May Allah God continue to bless you and your families. Assalamu alaikum.
This house is dedicated to knowledge and to the spreading of knowledge. Elijah Muhammad inspired new thought, new mind, new way of civilization among black people. But he wanted a house from which a light could be lifted up to give guidance to all who would be guided as this world begins to close down. This National Center for the re-education and retraining of the black man and woman, but for the totality of the human family of our planet. I named this mosque after the only woman that the Quran names a chapter after, the mother of Jesus, Maryam. All human beings need to be re-educated. That is the purpose of the National Center.
In today's Liberated Sisters COVID report, caught in the grip of a triple crisis, how does America move forward? We have been tracking the pandemic with ethnic media services during weekly conference calls, and recently the conference call dealt with the United States in the grip of a triple crisis. You have the COVID-19 pandemic, the resulting economic collapse, and an eruption of civil unrest over violent racist confrontations. So what have we learned, and what can we do to address the deep-seated structural inequalities these crises reveal? Here is Roy P. Crocker, professor of law at the University of Southern California and author of the book Nigger Theory, Professor Jody Armour, on why we need criminal justice reform.
And I'd like to connect my remarks to those that went just before me by the doctor. I connect that to law enforcement reform in this moment that's been precipitated by brutal law misconduct in relation to another black person. You know, I started writing about this area, my first book was in 1997. It was entitled Negrophobia and Reasonable Racism, The Hidden Cost of Being Black in America. And it was really about every one of the issues we're talking about today. So it seems nothing's changed but what year it is. It seems that when we were going through these marches in 2013, 14, 15, Black Lives Matter movement, there was a wash, rinse, repeat cycle that you could anticipate that we were always going to go through. It was going to be, first, let's convene a commission. Then let's hold some public hearings. Then let's have some people vent about their frustration and anger. And then we're going to have a few policy folks say, well, I know, here's some interventions that are going to prevent this from happening again. And they're going to come up with some interventions like body cams. Someone's going to say there's going to be another set of hashtags. That isn't going to have solved it. Someone's going to say, what about implicit bias training? More hashtags. Somebody's going to say, well, what about de-escalation training? More hashtags. And someone's going to say, well, what about community policing? And here we are looking at a moment in Minneapolis, Minnesota, their police department had all those interventions. They were one of the early departments to start implementing all those interventions, and it didn't solve the problem. In fact, as was pointed out going in, you had not only the officer who actually had his knee on the neck of George Floyd, but the three others who just stood by. So I think we're coming to the realization that those interventions are, there's not a technological fix. There's not a way to tweak policy and fix this problem, that it really requires some deeper analysis. And that deeper analysis has to do with structural racism, to be sure. The only way we're going to avoid having to go through this discussion again and again is start to address those structural racism issues. But beyond just structural racism, it also has to do with our hearts and minds and our lack of care and concern, empathy for Black lives. Black lives just don't matter is the bottom line here. Black lives haven't mattered since the inception of this nation. A lot of the, as you know, founders were celebrating liberty and democracy and owning slaves. Then we had a cataclysmic race war, 600,000 dead Americans, and we went into Jim Crow. Black lives didn't matter under Jim Crow as much as non-Black lives. And now we're looking at, if you walk down Los Angeles, where I am, you go into Skid Row, you walk down the street in Skid Row, which is probably the fiercest expression of structural violence in America, the largest homelessness encampment in America. Families, everyone, all kinds of folks living there together. 75% of the faces are Black. And I just had to do that number. That's in Down, Out, and Under Arrest, Forrest Stewart's book. 75%, you go into prisons and jails, and the demographics look roughly the same. Right? And COVID-19, of course, is disproportionately hitting the Black community. So what's the fix? What's the better solution? I know, as I said, hearts and minds. I think the trope for our problem is Hurricane Katrina and what you saw in the Ninth Ward with those blacks standing with water up to their necks. And 1 day goes by, 2 days go by, 3 days go by, 4 days go by. Sean Penn is rowing out up there, handing out fresh water because FEMA still couldn't get its act together. There was not a panic of empathy collectively for those black lives. When those planes ran into those buildings in New York, though, in 9/11, there was a panic of empathy, and we just helped. We just got it done. Nothing kept us from offering relief to those victims, right? And so I've done. I have a book coming out on August 18th, in which I do a lot of research and psychological studies that point out we have an in-group empathy bias that makes us not feel the same level of care and concern for out-group members as in-group members. You know, and it happens at the level of the mirror neurons, on a neuronal level. It's not even conscious a lot of times. But the bottom line is we have relative indifference to the suffering of those who don't belong to our in-group. Now, how does that play out in terms of this police situation in which we find ourselves? Well, the solution isn't the technological ones we've learned, I think, or the policy tweaks. We have to cut back on the police department. Activists have been saying that for some time now, last several years, and now this is really bringing it home. We need to make deep slashes in the budgets of police departments and reallocate those resources to the things that the doctor before me was talking about. Address homelessness or houselessness is my preferred way of talking about it. Address healthcare, address education, address income disparities, right? We can do a lot of things if we have the resources to do them, but right now those resources are being sucked up by our law enforcement departments, right? Here in LA, we have about a $5.5 billion annual budget we're looking at coming out in the coming year. Nearly 54% of that, 53-point-something% of that in the mayor's budget was to go to LAPD, right? And you have those kind of staggering numbers around the country. Now, you take that money out of those police departments, reallocate it, divert it to the kinds of problems we're talking about, and we can have a lot better health outcomes. We can address the unemployment issue, and we can have a lot less violence against black folk. Generally, because the violence is often driven by the enforcement of low-level nonviolent offenses. George Floyd is dead today for passing allegedly a counterfeit $20 bill. Low-level nonviolent offenses, when they cut down on the enforcement of stop and frisk in New York, which is why you need a lot of times these police personnel, the crime rate didn't go up, it went down. When police decided they were going to have a work stop slow down in 2014, 2015, after Eric Garner said, "I can't breathe," and there were marches, and they was upset, and they had a conflict with de Blasio. They had to work kind of slow down for several months, right? The crime rate didn't spike, didn't go up. It actually went down a little because they weren't doing so much proactive broken windows policing. So you can reduce the police presence without reducing our public safety. And then you can have the police, and I'll wind up with this, you can have the police, once you divert their funding from, kind of broken windows policing, you reduce their size, you have those funds go to other social services, social workers, that sort of thing, then you can focus the police attention on what it really should be focused on, and that's solving murders, rapes, violent assaults, robberies. In a lot of cities, those are only being solved at a 40-45% rate. And that's because the police resources are being diverted from investigation and good police work like that and going toward broken windows policing. That's it.
Other speakers for the Tracking the Pandemic session on Caught in the Grip of a Triple Crisis included Dr. Tung Nguyen, professor in the Health Division of General Internal Medicine at UCFS, John C. Yang, president and executive director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and Thomas Sayans, president and general counsel of MALDEF. To take us further into the Liberated Sisters COVID report, here is Angela Birdsong.
Ethnic Media Services, the shadow pandemic COVID-19's impact on women briefing, brings experts to discuss a United Nations Women report that explains how the crisis has exacerbated gender inequality, discuss the history of women in pandemics, and track the rise of domestic violence on women. Mimi Lin, Director of Behavioral Health and Domestic Violence at Venice Family Clinic in Los Angeles, says intimate partner violence is a pandemic in itself.
And we know that domestic violence is a pandemic. And I don't mean to misuse that word, but it is. It's across all cultures, all counties, all small villages and huge cities. I don't know of any culture that hasn't experienced it, or any religion. It's across the board. And I've worked in Boston, in Costa Rica, I've lived in France, I've lived in Hawaii and Los Angeles, and everywhere I go, I hear about communities and domestic violence.
Dr. Beatrice Duncan, Policy Advisor, Rule of Law for United Nations Women, gives examples of the effect of COVID on domestic violence.
So let me give you some concrete examples. We know that women around the world are in lockdown situations in which they are in stay-at-home situations, in quarantine situations, or in curfew situations. This is relegating them to the household or to be in the same environment with their abusers. As a result, we have seen a threefold spike in the incidence of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. We are seeing situations in which women are being abused not only by their partners, but sometimes also by their adolescent children. Many courts have shut down. Many courts are not sitting. A lot of cases have been put on adjournment or on hold. Many women are not receiving the protection orders that they need. A lot of women are also not receiving either maintenance for themselves or maintenance for their children. So there are a lot of judicial suspensions.
In Los Angeles, some help is available, states Mimi Lin of Venice Family Clinic.
In Los Angeles, you can continue to get a restraining order at the courts. So even though the courts are closed for everything, you can still get a restraining order. The other thing about specific to Los Angeles is when you call a domestic violence hotline, they can help you get into a motel. A lot of the shelters now have a voucher program where they can't take you into their shelter, but they can take you. They can try to help you get in a motel if there's still space available.
And recently, Ethnic Media Services also hosted a discussion on how minority and women-founded businesses were shut out of the Paycheck Protection Program.
So all the money went to the larger banks, and if you were a tiny company or a barbershop or something, you didn't have a relationship with one of those large banks, it's unlikely you would have gotten a loan because, like most businesses, they service their best customers first, whoever got there, and that's how the money got distributed. The other issue was about, especially in the Black community, almost 90% of the businesses are sole proprietorships. So you don't have a W-2, they're 1099 employees. So the example I give people, if you're a barbershop owner and you're just renting out your chairs and someone else a barber can rent those 4 chairs, you don't have W-2 employees, they're just agents of yours, people, your partners of yours. And so if you have to produce that documentation, and if you do a whole program based on your payroll, you're not going to be able to show that because it doesn't exist. So those are some of the issues.
That was Charles Phillips, Class A Director of New York's Federal Reserve Bank. Reporting for the Liberated Sisters COVID Report, I'm Angela Birdsong.
And now, here is Student Minister Ishmael Muhammad, Minister Farrakhan's National Assistant, with a timely message. Farrakhan predicted the unraveling of a great nation, delivered June 8th. This message can be viewed in its entirety at noi.org/webcast. I would like to say now, thank you so much to Sister Felicia, the Poetess Morris, Angela Birdsong, and all of you for tuning in. I'm Sister Charlene Muhammad saying if it's impacting our community or can uplift us as a people, let's talk about it. Here is Student Minister Ishmael Muhammad, which will close out our show for today. Peace.
Assalamu alaikum. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, the One God, to whom all praise is due, the Lord of all the world. We thank Allah for His beneficence. We thank Him for His mercy. We thank Him for His prophets and the scriptures which they brought. We make no distinction between any of God's prophets, messengers, and servants. We thank Him for Abraham, to Moses, to Jesus, to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and upon all of Allah's noble and honorable servants. I am a student of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, under the leadership, guidance, and example of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. I could never thank Allah enough, no matter how long I am blessed to live. If I live to be 1,000, which I don't think I will make it that far, maybe not even 500 or 300 or 200. But every day that Allah gives me breath, I want to be found expressing and demonstrating my sincere thanks for His intervention in our affairs, for fulfilling the promise that He made before my people were brought into slavery in the holds of ships. I thank Him for that promise that He made to His servant Abraham, telling Abraham that his seed would be a stranger in a land not of their own, and they would be slaves to another for 400 years. But God told Abraham, after that time, I will come. I will judge that nation which they, my people, will serve. And they shall come out from them. They shall go back to their fathers in peace. They won't go back empty-handed. They will go back with a great substance. He would give to His people a great inheritance, a great treasure in wealth that is in the knowledge and the wisdom and the truth that He would reveal to them, from them, to the whole of humanity. I thank Allah for His intervention in our affairs in the person of Master Fard Muhammad, and for raising from black people in America His messenger Messiah, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, and giving to him from the black man of America his chief helper, his chief servant, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, as a divine reminder, as a divine warner to complete the mission of the Messiah. I greet you all with the greeting words of peace, once again in the Arabic language. Assalamu alaikum. My dear listeners, my teacher, my minister, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, has warned us for over 4 decades now what we are witnessing in America and all over the world. In his Savior's Day address in Detroit in February of this year, he took up the title for his subject, The Unraveling of a Great Nation. He said to us, quote, that when you unravel something, you undo twisted, knitted, or woven threads. You investigate and solve or explain something complicated or puzzling. To unravel, it also means to separate, disintegrate, to take apart, destroy. The condition of America is puzzling. The world is looking at a country going to hell. The world is looking at a president who wants to be king when the Constitution and the Founding Fathers were trying to run away from what they suffered in Europe under the kings. So, there is a verse in the Quran, in the 16th chapter, the 92nd verse, which reads, "Be not like her who unravels her yarn, disintegrating it into pieces after she has spun it strongly." Her here is not talking about a woman as such, but if you see somebody knitting something with a design, and they leave it not secure one stitch, and then the same woman who stitched it strongly starts pulling on the yarn that she has knitted until it comes to pieces. And that is what's happening to America as we speak. America, dear listeners, was not built on a firm foundation. Although the weaving was done strongly, the nation called America was doomed from its inception. Tell me, how do you build a nation killing the native people? How do you build a nation bringing a whole people out of Africa to America to be made slaves? This is America's foundation. So, for them to lie to you and make you think that America is a land of promise for you, and you believe it. No wonder Jesus said, "I will set up a new heaven and a new earth, and the former things will pass away." Brothers and sisters, listeners, all of this is to go at the end of the time of the rule of the Caucasian. God comes and is present to set up a new government, a new people. "Behold, I make all things new." There will be a new heaven, a new earth. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us that the new heaven means a new spiritual power, and the new earth is a new political power. Because if heaven and earth don't work together, the earth suffers. If the rain stops, if the clouds don't come over the earth dies. So when you've got government, and all you can do as a member of Congress is say a weak prayer to open the Senate and the House of Representatives, but there is no real connection to God. Yet you say, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And you go on to say, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You lie. You don't respect God. You don't honor God that you say your nation is under. A nation that proclaims to be under God is a nation that's careful about how it deals with the issue of justice. A nation that claims to be under God is careful in everything that it does, knowing that at the end of the day, it must answer to God. So the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said, we are living in the time of the unraveling of this great nation. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan further said, you, my poor, pitiful brothers and sisters, you're opting to be a part of that. It is unraveling right in front of your eyes. You see the country cascading downward. You see the moral fiber of America getting into the gutter. Who wants a membership in a house of whores? Bought and paid for leaders. Nobody can stand up if the enemy says you don't stand up for that. So Satan is having a field day with America and making evil fair seeming. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in what we are witnessing now, wrote in his monumental book, Fall of America, he said, then America is beset all around now with troubles and destructions which have happened. That America thought that she was immune to the troubles and destructions which are going on in other nations. But now the same trouble and destruction that you read as happening in other countries and to other nations, these same troubles and destruction with their evil and gruesome sound are knocking on the door of America. They were knocking 50 years ago. It has come in now into the house. Now America, who criticized other nations in handling its internal affairs, much of which she had a hand in and creating those troubles in other nations by meddling in their affairs, is now front and center before the entire world in how she has handled the coronavirus pandemic and another killing of a black man. The Washington Post came out with an article this week, and the headline of the Washington Post has this title, this headline: CIA analysts have seen these scenes before in countries before a collapse. The article goes on to say these scenes have been disturbingly familiar to CIA analysts accustomed to monitoring scenes of societal unraveling abroad. The massing of protesters, the ensuing crackdowns, and the awkwardly staged displays of strength by a leader determined to project authority. In interviews and posts on social media in recent days, current and former U.S. intelligence officials have expressed dismay at the similarity between events at home and the signs of decline or democratic regression they were trained to detect in other nations. One of the CIA analysts said, "I've seen this kind of violence. This is what autocrats do. And this is what happens in countries before a collapse. And it really does unnerve me." The professor at King University, Gail Helt, in Tennessee, said the images of unrest in U.S. cities combined with the President Trump's incendiary statements echo clashes she's covered over a dozen years at the CIA, tracking developments in China, Malaysia, and elsewhere. And former CIA and national security officials render similarly troubled verdicts. And lastly, the article says, quote, "The imagery of a head of state in a call with other governing officials saying, quote, 'Dominate the streets, dominate the battle space.' These are iconic images that will define America for some time." And it further says, "It makes it much more difficult for us to distinguish ourselves from other countries we are trying to contest or influence." So in recent years, U.S. officials have urged restraint or denounced crackdowns against protesters or vulnerable groups in Russia, Iran, Turkey, Malaysia, Syria, and other countries. But again, a faithful warner from God. He told you, America, that as you were critical of other nations and how they handle unrest and dissatisfaction of their own citizens, and you would criticize them by using violence. Now, look how you're behaving. Look at your response to your own people. So the minister warned you, America, that you were going to face this, and said, let's see when it happens within your borders how you act. In our current edition of the Final Call newspaper, it reported that there was condemnation and calls for accountability from world leaders, human rights chiefs, and organizations engaging in solidarity demonstration in world capitals from Monrovia to Liberia to London, Berlin, Tokyo, China, Toronto, and as far away as Australia, New Zealand, and Poland. People protested at the doors of the American consulate. Now, you bask in criticizing leaders of other nations. Now, here is what those leaders are saying about you. China State News Agency described the U.S. civil unrest as Pelosi's beautiful landscape, a reference to U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's comment last summer that Hong Kong protests were a beautiful sight to behold. So the editor-in-chief of the Chinese Global Times wrote, American politicians now can enjoy this sight from their own windows. Beijing has long condemned American politicians, including Ms. Pelosi, for glorifying violence coming from the Hong Kong demonstrators, who are categorized by China as rioters showing signs of terrorism. Our big friend and brother, the former Ghanaian president, Jerry John Rawlings, he said, quote, "If some of these atrocities, especially from some white police officers against black citizens, cannot shock the American populace to see evidence of their own decline, what can?" The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei of the Islamic Republic of Iran, said, quote, "If you're dark-skinned, walking in the U.S., you can't be sure you'll be alive in the next few minutes." He went on to criticize America and say African Americans are deprived of human rights, not civil rights. Our struggle, our plight has never been about civil rights. It has always been a human rights issue. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, said, how can they, talking about America, claim to support human rights? That despite the fact that African Americans represent only 13% of America's society and 25% of the victims of police brutality are black. My dear and beloved listeners, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to us that this people that we have been under are a people that are disagreeable to live with in peace. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad wrote in his book, Fall of America, that we have pursued justice in ignorance by not knowing the enemy. The science of warfare was one of the sciences that the slave master and the slave master's children refused to teach us. The science of warfare deals with you knowing your opponent. What boxer or fighter gets in the ring and does not study his opponent, his weaknesses, his strengths, his tactics, so that he can effectively fight his opponent and come out victorious? It is our ignorance of the enemy that keeps us from securing the freedom, the justice, and the equality that is our right. The Bible tells us the way of peace they do not know. There is no justice in their paths. So it's futile to keep demanding justice from these people because they don't know the way of peace. The book of Isaiah tells us the people that we're dealing with, that they have turned them, talking about the paths of justice, the road of justice, into crooked roads, and no one who walks along them will know peace. I want to help us from my teacher, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, to help all of us that are in pain, all of us that are angry and dissatisfied, and your anger and your dissatisfaction is justified. But we gotta know the nature of the enemy In the book of John, Jesus has a very heated exchange with the enemy. And the enemy, like he always does, he tries to put a good face on himself and claim to be what he is not. They said to Jesus that they were Abraham's seed. And Jesus replied, if you were Abraham's seed, you would do the works of Abraham. As it is, you seek to kill a man that has told you the truth. Then they come back and they charge Jesus of being born out of fornication by saying we were not born of sexual immorality. You see, Jesus was born from Mary and Joseph. Mary and Joseph, we are told, were pledged to be married. But before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. This is the gospel according to Matthew. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace. And he had in mind to divorce her quietly. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit, that she will give birth to a son, and this son would be named Jesus. So the Jews who attacked Jesus knew who the Father was. They said to Jesus boldly after Jesus defeated that argument, now they come back after claiming to be the seed of Abraham, after saying that they were not born out of fornication. Now, and you've heard this before, we are the children of God. They told Jesus, we have one Father, even God. See? The enemy always trying to make himself out to be good. He presents himself as an angel of light, but he's Satan all along. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing, which means Satan is a master deceiver. He's the arch deceiver. And your Bible tells you that Satan deceiveth the whole world. So Jesus now comes back strong. He said, if God were your Father, you would love me, because I came from the Father. I came from God, and I am here. I came not of my own accord, but He sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot bear to hear my word. Then he hits them and exposes them. You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. Truth is the basis for justice. So when you're dealing with a people that have no truth in them, then justice cannot come to those who cry for it. The Bible tells us, and Jesus speaking, when he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell the truth, you don't believe me. Which one of you convicts me of sin? If I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is of God hears the words of God. And the reason why you do not hear them is that you are not of God. See, we're dealing with Satan and a satanic system that can't give you and me, the black, the brown, the red, and even poor whites, justice. It's not in them. But you got to know, see, Satan can't help himself. And you dealing with the nature of something. Allah tells us in the Quran, there is no altering of Allah's creation. You're trying to change that which is made by nature. It's the nature of Satan to lie, to deceive, to cheat, to steal, to murder, to kill. So what Brother Student Minister Abel shared with us that is happening, they want to pit the black against the brown. They want to start a race war. Satan does not spare an opportunity to create mischief off of the sorrow, the grief, and the pain of others. So these protests have been hijacked. These protests for the legitimate cause for justice have been infiltrated with provocateurs and instigators, all whites, coming to provoke violent behavior. And these have been staged, bricks being staged where there's no construction going on in the area. How did the bricks get stacked? Who set it up? Some of them among us with earplugs. It was well orchestrated, well coordinated. They brought with them shovels, crowbars, weapons, hammers, axes. There are many forces of evil at work, and there are forces that want to bring down this nation that have nothing to do with the Muslim or black or brown agenda at all. These forces want to create a civil war. We have seen these anarchists turning peaceful protests into violent mobs. On social media, you see these little white people come up to the brother or a sister, handing them a brick. That's right. Setting trash cans on fire and encouraging the violence. That's not us. Yes, we did some looting. But you that want to condemn the little man, the little brother, and you're the biggest looters. You want to condemn our little brother and sister who do what they do for survival and out of necessity. What excuse do you have when you loot nations? You're the biggest gang banger and thug on the planet. You go into other nations and rob them of their resources. You kill the innocent on our planet. And yet you condemn the little man on the street to be a thug and a gangbanger? You do your evil out of greed and lust. And there is no comparison between the little theft that we involve ourselves in on the street. You go into nations and rob them of banks. Little money we take, you go in and rob them of their entire economies. But You are exposed this day that we live in. That is the day of God's judgment. So we've seen these arsonists, these rioters, and this so-called group, Antifa, putting in the hands of young black men and women objects to loot and vandalize. When did whites become so concerned with the shooting and murder of a black man? I'm not saying that there is not those who are sincere and sympathize with our cause. No, I'm not saying that at all. Because what we are seeing is that the killing and murder of George Floyd has ignited and manifest the anger, the discontent, the frustration and dissatisfaction that's in the breast of the people who are tired of inequality, tired of injustice, tired of this form of government. There are many that are out there sincere, but you have your agenda. And as often as history shows, others ride on our backs, like with the civil rights movement. Others come in to ride on our pain, our sweat, our blood, and our suffering to fulfill what they have on their agendas. But Allah intends to expose all of the schemes, all of the hypocrisy. But we will not be used like that. No. You're not going to take advantage of our pain and our hurt from the loss of our brother George Floyd. No, 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 no. That's not going to happen. There was a man that I saw on a video who staged his own beating. And white people beat this white man up. Then when he was in custody or taken to interview, they asked him who did it. He said 2 black men. And there's a video that shows clearly he got beat up by his own, but they put it on us. See, this is what the minister told us in his monumental book, Torchlight for America, about scapegoating. See? They want to put all of their evil, all of their wickedness, all of their failures on the least in the society. But Allah is going to expose your wicked plan.